Hi, I'm Marjorie Morrison.
And this is Patrick Kennedy.
And you are listening to the Psych Hub podcast, The Future of Mental Health. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to have you back for another episode. I know that this one you're going to really enjoy because it's pretty different than some of the other ones that we've done so far. Today, we're going to talk about Google. Google is such a fascinating concept and company. If you think about it, it's a verb. It's the one thing we do when we want to learn something about anything. We Google it. I recently heard a statistic that every 2 seconds, someone searches or Googles the word depression. So think about it. Just in that time it took me to say that sentence, someone searched for the word depression, which just goes to show all of us how important Google is in mental health, both externally and internally. And that's why we really wanted to bring you Dr. Jessica DiVento today so that we can learn more about Google and what they're doing internally and externally. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from Dr. Jessica DiVento, who works in Google's people operations as the Chief Mental Health Advisor at YouTube. And I really just love that title, Chief Mental Health Advisor. I don't know how many other companies have that, but I just think it's really cool. Jessica is going to talk to us today about the boundaries between work-life balance and how they're blurred and how that is leading to burnout, which of course is exacerbated during COVID. But we're also going to talk about how not all technology is bad. It can be very intentional when it's really used right. Google is most arguably one of the most innovative companies in the world, and especially what they're doing around mental health, not just publicly, but with their own workforce. And I just think that it's important for all of us to learn about what they're doing so we can all, really learn together. So I'm excited today to introduce you to the brilliant and transformational Dr. Jessica DiVento. Welcome to the show. Tell us, as you've had this journey, you came in as a psychologist and then you found yourself in a social media platform. How did that come about for you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey, and I will say it's luck, but luck is opportunity meets preparedness, right? So I actually worked for about 7 years in university health where I was treating students and teaching and doing research and such. And after that, I was looking for a pivot in my career and actually fell into an employee assistance program. And I used to run Google's on-site clinical services for the US as a vendor. And through that was doing consulting for the benefits team because they didn't have any internal subject matter experts on mental health. And then unfortunately, the shooting incident at YouTube happened, and I helped to support the team with critical incident response for that incident. And through that was introduced to the leadership, the executive team at YouTube, including Susan Wojcicki, the CEO herself. And she actually was the one that said, you know what, let's make this happen. I want a person running mental health at my company. I want to prioritize this. It's something that's always been important to her. And so, she waved her magic wand, and thus I became an employee about 2 years ago. Yeah.
That is so amazing. I mean, just the title alone, Chief Mental Health Advisor. I mean, that's just so cool. Is that common in other companies?
I've seen other companies certainly have internal people running mental health programming in people operations and HR. And definitely I see a lot of like chief clinical such and such when the product is related to mental health. But it's not a very common position at all. I know a few other companies off the top of my head that definitely have something like this, like E&Y, American Express. But by and large, most companies do not have positions like this that are really driving it kind of internally embedded with the business.
Yeah, Jessica, thanks again for joining us. And it is an important thing to point out that we're still just starting our way along this journey, especially from the business community. As you point out, I've had the chance to go in front of the National Business Group on Health, Pacific Business Group on Health, Northeast Business Group on Health, and there's really just a beginning of an effort to build out this space, to your point, that replicates what you're doing at YouTube, and talk a little bit about what factors you look at making sure that you put together a comprehensive approach through your EAP, through your disability?
I mean, certainly we can continue to have great programs and great resources. And working at a place like Google, we have very, very strong benefit package, including our mental health benefits. I will say that that only goes so far because that really only treats issues once they arise. And so, in addition to that, we have a pillar. Well, I should take a step back. Looking at our full strategy at YouTube, we have a pillar focused on increasing awareness of resources because we can have these great benefits, but if people don't know about them, they're not going to be able to take advantage. The second pillar we have is actually addressing stigma related to mental health. Because even if the resources exist and folks know about them, they're not going to take advantage of them if they don't feel comfortable in doing so. And that definitely has a lot of managers' involvement at that stage because they are a key component on the front lines, spreading the word, talking about mental health in an inclusive way. And then the third pillar is addressing the root causes of burnout. Because ideally, where the employer may not be responsible for all mental health issues, they're certainly responsible for not making it worse. And certainly responsible for creating the right environments that people can take advantage of the benefits and services if and when they need them. Now, burnout is a workplace dependent phenomenon, and only recently is a diagnosable condition. And we know that it includes symptoms such as cynicism and pessimism about the workplace, reduced productivity and efficiency at work, and also chronic fatigue and exhaustion. And people have to meet criteria across all of those to meet diagnostic. But we know that burnout directly, again, relates to productivity, absenteeism, and also increases the risk for other mental health conditions, such as diagnosed mood disorders like depression, anxiety diagnoses, substance abuse issues. The list goes on. So if the employer can really take ownership over that burnout pillar, and that's where that strong business partnership really comes into play, we can make a substantial difference in creating a work environment that fosters mental health in a positive way versus increasing or exacerbating that risk. And so I partner directly with the executives, directly with HR partners, and directly with other kind of leadership folks to address those from a business perspective, as well as making sure we have great programs and great communications and stigma campaigns and fun newsletters and all this kind of stuff. And so managers certainly play a key role in communicating expectations to their reports. We have guides to help them facilitate these conversations and also to think through what factors might be contributing to well-being related issues. And I think classically folks have thought about it like work-life balance. Certainly work-life balance is one key component, but it's more than that. It's having clear expectations. It's having clear prioritization. It's having good cross-functional alignment, reducing workplace politics, things of that nature. And so it takes a long time to change the culture. If we think about the way I think about mental health, if it's okay to jump into this here, and I'm not rambling too much.
Absolutely.
The way that I think about mental health, it needs to be pervasive throughout the system. So if we think about mental health similar to how we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, for DEI, say 10 plus years ago, it was all about, did we meet certain quotas? Did we hire a certain number of people? Do we offer XYZ kind of training and resources to our population? But as we know, that's not really diversity. That's ticking the boxes and going through what we think is good. But true diversity, equity, inclusion is how do we do business? How do our people feel included? How inclusive are our products, right? And we layer mental health in a similar fashion. Mental health is not, do we have great EAP benefits and, do we make sure people have trainings once a year? Those are the foundation. Those are the starting points. Really, we want to go beyond that and think through how do we think through our business strategy so it's supportive of mental health and not detrimental to mental health? How do we make sure our workplace environment is stigma free and so much and so forth? And so we're just kind of leaning in that direction now. And I think other companies are slowly starting to do the same. And I think that's where we're headed, in the future is more in that direction.
What do you think you've seen from other companies and vice versa? What do you think they've seen from your work that has been kind of cross-fertilizing in each other's efforts. I know ENY, American Express, there's Chevron, there's a bunch of,
Yeah.
I know Bank of America is really jumping into this space big time. Um, so tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and kind of how as a broader chamber of commerce, if you will, that this level of literacy is on the rise, but that there is some real practical um, solutions that are being disseminated in these places of business.
I will say that while the conversation in some companies has been up around well-being has been going on for quite a long time, the nuance in regards to addressing the business practices tends to be that newer piece of the conversation. I'll also say that activating peer support models is something that Google we have in place, and we've also learned from a lot of other companies that have been doing similar peer support activations. So internally, we have a group called the Blue Dot Group, and the idea is that people have a blue dot on their badge, or you can look them up on their profile online since it's all virtual now. And they have this blue dot that designates they're a safe person to talk to about mental health and well-being related issues. And they get, specialized training to become a listener. And there are other ways folks can get involved as well. They can become an ally. They can become a well-being champion to help run events and promote health resources, because we know it can't just be tops down. That usually doesn't work. It's tops down and bottoms up. So when we have these grassroots efforts and we actually foster those and we listen to that community and listen to what works, and we also rely on the imagination and creativity and genius that comes from that community and integrate that into our practices as part of our best practices as well, it's a much better approach.
That's awesome. I love that. It's such a easy way to facilitate sensitivity and connection in the workplace. I know within the LGBTQ community, there people are starting to say their name and then the pronoun that they identify with as a new way of making sure people feel safe and accepted in the world with their sexual orientation. So it's like a whole new movement. And of course, after the recent year with the attention on Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the terrible tragedies that have taken place, but that have awoken a greater interest in finally really combating racism, and systemic racism is really what it's about. What things are you doing there that is trying to, as you said, sensitize people who may not have familiarity with how to talk about this with their colleagues? Um, what's the language that it doesn't like re-stigmatize or insult or alienate people? What kind of work are you doing in that space? Because it tracks very closely to the work that you're doing on trauma and on mental health.
Yeah, and so certainly similar to the diversity, equity, inclusion efforts that you mentioned with LGBTQ folks and sexual orientation and gender identity issues in regards to using correct pronouns, and certainly similar to efforts in the DEI space for the Black plus community and other folks of color. There is a guide to inclusive language around mental health that we've put out and is contributing to that larger body of work that exists at Google. And for us, it's less about correcting people when they misstep, even though that, subtle can be done in subtle and supportive ways. And it's more about making sure that we're giving people the tools so that the conversations can be had. I think right now people are so afraid to misstep that they don't have the conversation in the first place.
Right.
Or when they do make a mistake, they're so embarrassed that it ends up shutting them down. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to open up the conversation. Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure we're fostering the conversation to move forward and that we're empowering people with the tools and the language to have these conversations in really healthy, supportive, and robust ways, because that's better to us than the conversation not be had at all, which, for example, like language around suicide, I would rather somebody use the incorrect term of committed suicide, versus the correct term died by suicide, just to facilitate the conversation forward, and then equip them with the right tools so that they know what the language is going forward to use more inclusive language.
It's almost like you have a palette and you can just a blank canvas and you can create this incredible innovative environment of where mental health needs to be from an internal perspective and a corporation perspective. And the cool thing about Googlers, I mean, I don't know if this is true, so this is my envision of Googlers, is that they are very creative and innovative. And so therefore you have this population that is, can think about new ways to do this. And it sounds like you get an opportunity to shape some of that. So that is really cool. Can you tell us, is there a story or an experience or something that you've rolled out that you feel really proud of, or that you've kind of seen some growth from where you started to now?
Absolutely. We actually kicked off a new sort of project this year, which is we have launched across all of YouTube. We send out a monthly mental health newsletter. And in that newsletter, we talk about different resources. We highlight different events from around the company supportive of mental health and well-being. We always have events to promote. We publish top tips for the month, depending on the theme that we put out for folks to support their own mental health and well-being. And we highlight a different YouTuber's story every month about their own personal mental health journey. And it's been amazing to watch, for the first person that we were able to get to share their story, which was somebody who's very beloved at the company, to share his story openly, to watch the swell of support for that individual, for our program. So many people opening up and saying, we love reading about this. This is me. I feel seen. I feel heard. And then more people raising their hand and volunteering and say, I want to share my story too. We've even had executives share their story in the course of things, which had an amazing impact. Yes. And people are really reading these too. We've had really, really high, strong engagements. It was a test. We weren't sure how it was going to land, but clearly it is one of our key programs in addressing the stigma and getting the word out on a really consistent basis. And so we've been super proud of that.
And I know you put out such good content. Have you been able to find that really you've got this people searching and then you've got all this content and you can match them? Have you seen some impact there?
Yeah, we have seen an increase in mental health searches since COVID started, which is not surprising. And what's wonderful is we're able to serve people content about really useful information and about other people that they can relate to going through these difficult times. Not everybody in the world has access to mental health services. And so YouTube can even start as that starting point or to fill that gap where to get people information where they don't have access to that professional care. Certainly YouTube, of course, not providing any kind of treatment or medical advice per se.
Tell us a little bit about that work-family balance, work-life balance that you mentioned earlier. What types of things are really encouraged, given the fact that technology is something that intrudes in all of our lives? But I suspect, especially so for people who are so proficient in technology and spend so much of their time developing that technology. I don't know, maybe they're done with it by the time they go home, but what if they're like the rest of us and they can't put it down? Like, what kinds of things are encouraged in terms of healthy balance for folks who work in the technology center of the world?
I think the question is really tricky, especially right now during COVID, because we using technology also as a tool to stay connected to other people. And so many people talking about the benefits of social media and helping them stay connected to their loved ones while we're physically distant has definitely been a key message. I think it's, and again, I'm not an expert necessarily in the digital well-being space, but for some of the stuff that I've read and just from my own personal perspective, it's less about the quantity of digital consumption, although there's definitely some concerns for people who might struggle with tech addiction where quantity is a concern. So I'm not saying in all cases, but it's more about the quality of that consumption and the how we consume content. Are we consuming content because we're bored? Or we're consuming content because we're compelled to do so? Right. And that's just a behavioral kind of almost like a mindless consumption of tech? Or are we mindfully consuming and being intentional about our use to educate ourselves, to inform ourselves, to connect to others, to be entertained, to help to manage our mood? All of these are really adaptive and healthy uses of technology to help improve our lives, our day-to-day lives, and make our lives better. And so certainly it's a difficult balance to think about where is technology adaptive and helpful, and how can we lean into that space in an intentional way, and where might it be more maladaptive or unhelpful, and how can we actually begin to draw boundaries around that type of use, and be more intentional towards moving towards the adaptive side.
I think that's most beautiful, succinct, real explanation of this whole dilemma that we face as a modern society that I've ever heard. Honestly, like I think that knowing that there are boundaries like everything else in our lives, and that like everything else in our lives, we need to be very mindful about addiction in all ways. We need to be very intentional, as you said, about all the other choices we make in our day and how we spend our time and how we work on relationships that with our loved ones and with our children and so forth. So it's a great context to put this in. You know, it's honestly, even if I'm someone who's in this space, I don't hear that encapsulation put out there. In other words, I think that and I can say this is kind of the outside ombudsman, but I think your industry needs to do a much better job at talking about those boundaries and the literacy. I mean, if we're talking about mental health literacy, we're talking about physical fitness and health, it seems to me it would behoove the industry that will reap the windfall of negativity if we don't manage this right. And since it's still relatively early in our human experience with technology, it would just seem to me, as a politician, that when you look at the indicators for children kind of getting trapped on a lot of technology, losing their own self center, getting captive to a lot of this shallow, impressionable, judgment of them and so forth, that it would be really helpful for them to know walking into this what they were walking into. And it's almost like PG for the movies or R or X. You have a way of helping people judge not the content, but the content as it relates to, like you said, how to measure it, so to speak, like you just pointed out so effectively. It's not necessarily quantity, it's quality, it's these boundaries. Like these are terms of art, like we're talking about with mental health in general, that aren't well understood generally. And I think, frankly, we can't assume people will know, unless they're listening to this podcast, how to think about this from listening to you.
It's funny you say that, because when my kids are still quite young, but when they were born, the American Pediatrics had pretty clear guidelines that there was no screen usage for kids under the age of 2. They've recently updated those guidelines to say something to the effect of, limited screen time at early ages, but that it's more about the quality of screen time and consumption at the early age, so that the content they're watching should be engaging. This back and forth, FaceTime and stuff with families is allowable, and all this kind of stuff. And so that literacy piece that you're talking about, I think we're still learning what that means and what those right limits are. But teaching it from the beginning certainly is going to be important. And we can think about it too in how we think about relationships. Like, are all relationships good? No, some relationships suck us dry. Some relationships feed and invigorate us. And if we can pay attention and be mindful and lean into the ones that feed us and help us and are really adaptive for us, and then limit and create those really healthy boundaries with those that are actually sucking and draining our energy or bringing our mood down, then we're going to be better off for it. And I think we can think about that similarly to our relationship with technology as well. But you're right, it takes quite a bit of learning to get to that place, and personal insight and awareness.
So I think the words intentional and mindful, they're new words. I think just generally in our lexicon that we're seeing people use more and more, they're really right on. If you really think the meaning of intentional and mindful, it really helps you clear away a lot of the clutter in your life that will totally intrude on everything unless you make an intentional decision to put it to the side. And of course, in managing our lives, we do that with all of the emails we get. We have to triage and learn how to prioritize, and that holds true in all things in life. But maybe technology is now making that front and center, as a urgent matter that we still have to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it gets tricky with work because in the workplace, I know you're mentioning managing emails and so much. And, certainly there's some things that you kind of have to do and get through, and then paying attention to the components of work that actually feed you and give you purpose and give you meaning. And how do you feel? And those can increase that positivity and joy that ideally everybody has in their workplace. I recognize a lot of people don't have that privilege, but something that, of course, we could all strive to get.
And it's interesting because you started out by talking about burnout and how burnout is really real. And everything we're talking about here is the contributing factors to burnout too, right? The technology and the email. And now people are working remote. So it's like before you might have had eyeballs on them, or, just it was a connection point, and you could, I would imagine, internally have more, that feedback loop from people. How are they doing? How are you managing that now? Trying to kind of figure out people's mental health, and at the same time not being able to see them and knowing that everybody's kind of separated.
And there's factors that wouldn't historically have contributed to burnout in the classic sense for an work from the office environment that are now contributing to burnout in a work from home environment, because the boundaries between work life and life outside of work are so blurred and mushy. And, I can speak for myself with like a ton of kids in the house and trying to be a full-time parent, trying to be a full-time employee, trying to be a full-time teacher, on top of that to support them in their education. And it is an incredible challenge. And so the pressures obviously interplay with each other in a way that maybe wouldn't have traditionally been the case when we think about burnout. Certainly, we think about who are the people that are going to get to the folks feeling burned out the most. It's going to be our frontline folks. Is it going to be HR or comms coming out from our mental health team? Maybe, but probably not. Those are only setting the tone and the culture and helping encourage the conversation to be had. But really, it's managers who are at our front line and should be meeting with their reports on a regular basis that need to create the space and the permission to be talking about these things. So we even ask our managers now to have regular well-being conversations with their reports, and we give them a guide in order to facilitate these conversations to be productive, to get at what can managers do to support an individual's well-being in a really meaningful way, so it allows hyper-personalized support at scale. And then leaning into our peer support, because peers also may be the only person that's going to give that nudge to say, hey, I see you and you're not doing well. Or, hey, I see you and I see you're struggling and I am too. And, here's what I've done to help myself. I wonder if there's anything, that you've considered. And here's some information about resources, so much and so forth. And so it's educating the broad community and definitely leaning into that manager support and helping support managers so they're taking care of themselves. Because if we burn out the managers, right, they're not going to be good to their reports or their teams. And so also helping managers understand that they really have to take care of themselves first so that they can show up and they can contribute. Because this is we're in it for a while, certainly with extended COVID and everything like that. So
and it may not go back to the way that it was. And so it's really, I commend you, because you've had to, while you've been on this job, sounds like you had a good plan, you had things organized, and then all of a sudden COVID happened for all of us, kicked it all into kind of overdrive, and now you had to rethink kind of these different touch points. And I talk also a lot to managers, and I hear that balance between wanting to take care of employees, but also needing to get jobs done, and holding people accountable who may have a harder time being focused at home with all of the distractions. Obviously we were joking, not everybody's heard this, but we were joking before we started this, that this conversation, that nowadays we're staring at ourselves on these screens all day, whether we're on Google Hangouts or Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is. We're staring at ourselves, and that's also very, like, I don't like it. I've never been so critical of myself. And you think about how do you not feel burnt out, or, not feel extra anxiety or stress, or everything that it's like a perfect convergence of all things to turn into what we're seeing as this kind of mental health crisis right now. And, I'm grateful for you too, because you can create a place where people can learn. But I would imagine you have employees who are struggling and may or may not show up to a peer to even notice that.
Yeah, certainly, just like anywhere else, just like all companies and all places right now, while we're all in the same storm, we're all in very different boats. And so this pandemic and all of the racial injustice that's been happening and all of these other stressors that are going on during this time are affecting people in wildly different ways and in very unique, personal ways. And so as much as we can, as we're hitting things from every angle, with comms channels and different initiatives about mental health, and making sure leadership is talking about mental health, and managers and peers to create the environment, there is a limit to how much we can do. And then we have, HR teams to proactively sometimes reach out to folks who we really are concerned about. If a peer doesn't feel comfortable reaching out, they can flag it to our HR team, who can reach out and have those conversations. So it is complicated. And yeah, some people are really struggling. The irony is some people are actually doing really well during this time too. I would love to meet more of those folks. Some people are really thriving, or the reality is some people are thriving in some areas, feeling maybe more connected to their partners or more connected to their kids in ways, while also struggling with balancing childcare and workplace responsibilities, or tensions, that they get harder to resolve from a remote working environment. So it really is a mixed bag that kind of creates a unique experience for each individual.
I think if we do our gratitude lists every day, which is a key component to a positive outlook on life, in my own case, being with my kids all the time has just been transformative. Never imagined what that was going to be like. I was constantly on the road, constantly getting on another plane, getting in a car to go to the airport, and then having to recuperate from those trips. Now I'm reading to them every night. I get to see them throughout the day. I just feel it in the intimacy and body language of our relationship, that we're just so much closer than I ever could have imagined. And if I were to look back on this, I'd say I never would have been in this situation had I not been forced to it, because it would have been beyond my ability to kind of envision and then implement in my life. Now, obviously, there's a lot, as you said, that goes along with that are stressors. But I'd say by and large, I've really been blessed with my God moving things in a way that I couldn't have decided to move them in my own limited view of the world. And so that's my gratitude part of my list.
Well,
I've got my default mode, and my default mode is to complain about what's not going my way. But when I make my gratitude list, which is one of the ways I keep my own mental health intact, I can see the benefit in these ways to having been forced to do things I wouldn't have otherwise done.
I love that you bring up gratitude and appreciation as being key components of building this, cultivating personal resilience and helping support our mental health in a very meaningful way. And other things that really help that is, moving forward with intention, having a plan for our day, and being flexible with that plan, because there's always something that's going to throw it off, getting interrupted by your kids or having a work project that's urgent fall on your plate last minute. But focusing on what we can control versus focusing what we can't control, staying connected to relationships that feed us and provide us with energy, and making time for that on a regular basis, setting aside time for ourselves every day, whether that's, and for self-care, whether that's getting 10 extra minutes of sleep, doing a 5-minute stretch routine, or for myself, I actually try to wake up even earlier. My kids wake up early. I try to wake up even earlier than they do, to have a cup of tea and silence in the morning, to sit quietly and to start my day in that way. And again, I only get 5 or 10 minutes to do that, but it's very important for me. And that's how I try to set my tone for the day, so that I can be more present and more patient. And again, that little bit of the little sliver of life that I can control doesn't mean I never lose my cool. No. Doesn't mean I never feel sad or angry, upset. Of course not. Doesn't mean I'm not scared with this pandemic with everybody else. No. But it does mean that it's not as hard as it could be. It's not as hard as it has to be.
Jessica, knowing what you know, what you walked into at this job, and what you've been able to do, if you had a magic wand, what would the future of mental health look like? And what would it look like at Google, YouTube, and what would it look like system-wide?
I mean, I love this question and I hate this question because it's so big and so complicated, and so many things, need to change to get it to that place. I mean, first and foremost is accessible and affordable healthcare for the world, which we are so far from. And I'll say thank you to you, Patrick, being here on this call, because I know that you helped pass the Mental Health Parity Act in 2008 in the US that actually helped us get so many steps closer to this goal. And there's still a long way that we have to go. Once we have the access part down, then we can also continue to work and fight and address the stigma, so that we're open to talk about our mental health struggles, just like we would, we broke a knee, that, my depression really flared up and I have been having a really hard time getting out of bed lately, or whatever it is, to make sure we get the community support that's really a huge factor in helping people heal and get back on the right track, and understanding that mental health is a spectrum from wellness to illness. It's not just when we're sick and not doing well. It's similar to other components of health, where it's like a muscle, that if it's something that you don't foster and take care of, you're going to be more prone to injury. You're going to be more prone to illness. And so taking care of ourselves, even when we feel we're doing well and healthy, and investing in that space in a way that makes sense. And from the employer perspective, is really looking at integrating mental health into the how we do business, right? And so if we do that, then we can help reduce that risk of burnout. Doesn't mean there's not going to be urgent work to do. No, there's always going to be urgent work to do. It's not doing urgent work. It's being more intentional and mindful of the how we do urgent work, to make sure we maintain our productivity in the workplace as well.
One of the things that I've found is, when we pre-COVID, it was, the great thing with technology today, if you're in 12-step recovery, are the apps that tell you exactly where your next 12-step meeting is, what time. You just push the button. It's like, you're right there, how to get there, and there's the time. And of course, there's so many meetings, so it just really makes it accessible. But I've often thought that businesses kind of need to designate place where these meetings can happen in proximity to the business, even though it's not the business's job. It's not, this is something outside of the business world, but to be intentional and mindful that, given the fact that thankfully 12-step recovery across so many different disorders has taken off, that that there should be a community effort to have places that can have these clubs, that they have in 12-step recovery, where there are meetings going on all the time, where let's say you return from COVID, we get our vaccinations, it's a new world next year. Where do people go if their care is not just from clinicians?
Yeah.
It's not just for mental health professionals, it's these peers that you spoke about earlier. How can you facilitate that? I mean, I love the dot. I think that's key. I think that there's been a problem for those of us who are part of anonymous programs, that none of us know who each other are. I mean, so I love
Friends
the
with
fact,
Bill.
yeah. So I love Friends of Bill, but you don't know, and until you know. So I think there's strength in community. And it would seem to me, if businesses could find a way to make that easier to access.
We have a strong recovery community internal at Google, and it is another grassroots effort that is supported, by the business and by the HR team and things. But it really is run from people who are living that life. And, you talk about the ease of access to those meetings. We also have on-site clinics, on-site counselors, on-site medical services, and many, many locations, so that getting into counseling doesn't take a huge trip outside. Although we have those options as well, too, where people through EAP can get somebody very close to home or work, depending on their personal preference, or on-site, as well. So
that's great.
Really, it's about giving people access, choices.
That's right. Awesome.
Jessica, before we let you go, I'm also curious, we haven't talked about this, but you have an international platform, really. I mean, even Google as an employee is throughout the world. Are you seeing these mental health issues outside of the US at the same kind of rate? Are you seeing any differences?
This is certainly a global crisis. This is certainly a global health crisis right now. That their mental health pandemic is coming lockstep with the COVID pandemic, and we're, our employees are not immune to that. Nobody's employees are immune to that, and so we're seeing that and doing our best to respond in the best way that we know how, based on best practices. But yeah, certainly this is not exclusive to the U.S. by any means.
I mean, I think that's so important because it's so real when you think about how different countries are, how different administrations are, and yet you're seeing these issues across the board. And it's all those things we talk about people need to be connected and isolated and all of those things. But really, it's independent of all the things that we have going on and all the noise. It's the raw facts, right? That we got cooped up, we have anxiety, we're not connected, and that's happening everywhere. And in a way, there's something comforting about that too, because we all have this shared experience and we're all seeing together the repercussions of that. And hopefully we'll come out of this with some new insights and some new gratitude and some new appreciation for just the little things, right? The things that we would take for granted can feel like a big deal now. So yes. I do hope we can slow down a little bit. I like Patrick was on an airplane every week, and there's something really nice about, there's so much more time in the day, even just having to not commute to work, right? You just get to walk from the bedroom, a few steps past the kitchen into the office. It's my commute. And every once in a while I'll go back into the bedroom for something but there's something to be said about that. So I think it's a nice way to look at it, that there is some gratitude. There are some things that hopefully will change. And companies get an opportunity to take a pause and rethink how they do their mental health. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate your company for bringing you in and being an innovative. You're thought leaders, and other people and other companies can replicate what you're doing, and we can truly make the world a better place.
Absolutely. And something that this pandemic has done has created space for the conversation. internally, our employees are very hungry for our mental health and resilience content during this time. And when we put it out, they're incredibly happy to hear it, and they're taking action, where they can. And I think externally as well, it's making it a little easier, not in all situations, not for all people, but in a lot of situations, it's making it easier to talk about people struggling and people's mental health struggling, because so many of us are in that place.
You hit the nail on the head. So, yeah. It's not the other. It's not the other.
Right.
It's all of us. Yeah.
We can relate, almost everybody can relate in different ways, certainly.
Right.
So I don't
sure.
think we can struggle. And so at least we're talking about it. That's the first step. You can't address the elephant in the room until you acknowledge that it's there. And so we've at least taken that first step.
And I will speak on behalf of Psych Hub. We love that we get to have a channel on YouTube, that we get to work with YouTube and be a creator of content for YouTube. And it's been a lot of fun to be able to work with YouTube and be part of all the great stuff that you guys do.
And we love having Psych Hub on YouTube. Certainly, people love your content, and I know they will continue to do so. So please keep putting it out there.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's been great to see you again. And when this is all lifting, look forward to seeing you in person.
Absolutely. Very, very nice to see both of you again. This is fun.
What's cracking, Hope Nation? It's your friendly neighborhood Kevin Hines, and this is the Psych Hub Brain Health Tip of the Week. Today, I'm providing you with 5 coping strategies that work for me. Don't exhaust your emotional reserve. Number 1, try to find balance between happy and serious conversations. Number 2, don't get lost in motivational books and interviews. Number 3, it's okay not to be okay. An external source of inspiration can sometimes be distracting. Read and watch in moderation. Give yourself breaks. Take a walk. Get dinner. Don't skip out on sleep. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow. Talk to someone, or if you don't feel like picking up the phone, write it down. Take time to develop your go-to self-care list. Write it down on a Post-it note and keep it at your desk, or make a note on your phone. These things can all help you find a better life.
As always, thank you for listening to our podcast.
If you enjoyed the show, drop us a review.
If you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast for the latest episodes.
For the latest insights, check us out at psychhub.com.